Hello, and welcome to the Idjit's Thoughts On podcast. I'm Paul Mackey. Around here, it's kind of interesting. My daughter is in Tech Week for her Shakespearean debut in Macbeth, and in rehearsals for an upcoming musical as well. I figured because we're getting close to the end of Whiz Kids, I should get the new shows up and running. Darcy and I have the new show with the two of us scheduled to launch March 3rd, so today I'm going to get started with Seeing Things, and hopefully I'll have Press Gang ready to start later this week. Once these 3 new shows are going, we'll get into Season 2 of the Rockford Files. I suppose I should start with a little personal background, and also some of what I know of the show's background. KTCA Television in St. Paul, Minnesota, now TPT, was my local PBS station growing up, and they had some funding, so they were able to broadcast additional programming beyond the regular national PBS feed. They had a complement of British programming, lots of dramas and 1980s Britcoms that I didn't pay much attention to, but also Monty Python, Doctor Who, The Hitchhiker's Guide TV series, and eventually even Red Dwarf. They also carried Canadian programming, and that included Degrassi Junior High and this other series, Seeing Things. It really felt like my dad and I discovered the show, and as far as I recall, it would pop up for a while and then disappear again, so it was always a bit of an unexpected treasure when we'd catch it again. We spent most of our summer family vacations in Canada, mostly off in the mountain parks, so not watching much TV, but lots of general Canadian culture each summer. So I have a bit of love for all things Canadian, and specifically I experienced Canada during the period this show was in production. I'm not sure if I shared any of that before launching my previous Canadian series, Men with Brooms, but it's been a while, so hopefully that's not too obviously redundant. The show I have looked up from time to time over the days of the internet. Obviously, I never heard much about it when it was airing. I was hoping I could tell you a bunch about how the show was conceived, piloted, and brought to series, and after a fair bit of searching, I found a single article at starburstmagazine.com written by Alan Boone about obscure television shows from Canada's past. Louis Del Grande was writer and occasional actor on a sitcom called King of Kensington. There he met associate producer David Barlow, and the two of them decided to work on a star vehicle for Louis. And Seeing Things was created out of that relationship. It's not much, but it's the most background I found about the lead-up to regular production. I'll pretty much go into any other details within the episodes themselves, but I will note the show ran for 6 seasons, but the first season consists of only 3 episodes, while the remaining 5 seasons had 8-episode runs. The typical Canadian series order tends to run no more than 13 episodes unless it's a major hit. The first 2 seasons appeared in the fall, and the last 4 premiered in spring, which has become standard practice. In Canada, there's a bit too much crossover from American shows and the publicity machine ramping up fall premieres of shows in the U.S. If you want to watch along, the entire series is currently available on YouTube, and it has been for quite some time. I'm not aware if the poster has reached the same sort of agreement to post but not monetize as the Press Gang poster, but as of the start of this show on the podcast, it is available. I have copies of my own saved for the completion of the series if it should be taken down, but fingers crossed. So today is Seeing Things, Season 1, Episode 1, I May Be Seeing Things, But I'm Not Crazy, originally aired Tuesday, September 15th, 1981. On that day of note, the Smithsonian operated the locomotive John Bull under its own steam in commemoration of the 150th anniversary of its first day of operation. It became the world's oldest operating locomotive. Sandra Day O'Connor was unanimously approved for the Supreme Court by the Senate Judiciary Committee. Vanuatu officially became a member of the United Nations. Comedian Ben Schwartz was born, and nightclub Studio 54 officially reopened after closing in 1980 when the owners were convicted of tax evasion. It appears that Canadian box office is officially lumped in as domestic included in the U.S. listings, so that week, number 5 was An American Werewolf in London, number 4 in its 15th week of release, Raiders of the Lost Ark, number 3, Arthur, premiering at number 2, Continental Divide, and the number 1 film was Body Heat. Since 1970, Canadian radio and television have a mandate to air a certain percentage of Canadian content, allowing the rest to be from other nations. There's a bit of crossover with the UK and Australia, but other nations can probably be interpreted mainly to mean US music. In the interest of reflecting cultural context, I will attempt to use the RPM charts as often as I can find that information. So, on this week, the RPM top 5 were: number 5, Start Me Up by the Rolling Stones; number 4, Fire and Ice by Pat Benatar; number 3, Sausalito Summer Night by Diesel; number 2, the duet of Diana Ross and Lionel Richie of Endless Love; and number 1 was Urgent by Foreigner. Looking down the chart, I do spot 4 certified Canadian singles. The highest one is at number 20, Jeff Hughes with Happy Birthday Kid. The one name that I recognize is Red Rider at number 42, but I do not recognize the song What Have You Got to Do, even after I found it and listened to it. Apparently the album is the same one that produced their most famous song, Lunatic Fringe. So what is it about? It's the summary. Louis Ciccone wakes up in a small room above his parents' Toronto bakery. He is freshly separated from his wife Marge, and the room is a compromise between just moving back to his parents' house in Mississauga at almost 40, or getting his own place, since he views the separation as temporary. Louis drops by the townhome where his wife and son Jason still live with a Darth Vader mask to give to his son. It's clear he's not respecting the limits of the separation. He's going to take Jason to the park, but his editor calls wanting him to do a story at the courthouse because someone called in sick. At court, he's meant to be at a case with stolen office supplies, but he accidentally sits in on a murder case. He sees attorney Heather Redfern laying out closing arguments on her first case. An unhoused man, Mr. Vernick, apparently stabbed another to death with no memory of committing the act. But as he hears her speak and looks at the defendant, he has a vision of Vernick, passed out with another figure planting the knife in his hand and dragging the already dead victim to lie nearby. Louis catches Redfern and the Crown Attorney in the hall, but the Crown Attorney cuts him off before he can explain himself. He tells Marge when he catches up with them at High Park, and she brushes it off as just little feelings that everyone has about things. But when he persists, she says he should go to the police if he thinks he's got something. Louis says they'll think he's crazy if he tells them he has visions. Louis heads back to the murder case courtroom and sees the jury return a guilty verdict in the case, and then sees a little more of the vision of actual events, someone leaving the staged murder scene in a car with a broken taillight. He tries to talk to Redfern, but she tries to walk away, then Redfern is nearly hit by a car. Louis sees the passenger in the car and notes the taillight is broken as well. He chases the car on foot, taking note of the plate number and calling it in to an assistant at the paper. At the office, he tries his best to hide from his editor in the test kitchen and then has to lie about the stationary pilfering case. This is complicated by the assistant telling him a Dr. Eric Brandt owns the car he saw. Brandt runs the Centered Behavior Institute, a self-improvement clinic of sorts with help for compulsive issues and addictions. Louis talks to Vernick in prison. It sounds like he and the murder victim had a fight sometime prior to the murder. The victim disappeared for a while and then turned up dead. Vernick was passed out drunk and didn't remember someone handing him the knife. He also mentions Freddie One-Leg, who disappeared around the same time but stayed gone. Louis checks out the Institute, claiming to be working on a story, and gets included into a weight loss group. During a trust fall, he has a vision of the guy who caught him carrying and planting the murder victim next to Vernick. He tries to get out fast. In a stairwell, he sees the murder victim trying to run away and being stabbed by Brandt in the lab coat. He tries again to leave and runs into Smythe, the guy he saw in the car. He convinces him that Louis looked familiar to him as they used to be old schoolmates several years apart. Louis reports all he has put together to Redfern. She tries her best to dismiss him, but he says she should check out Brandt and Smythe's criminal records and check with the morgue about Freddie One-Leg. Louis' editor calls him later at the bakery. He never turned in a story today, and he is suspended. The next day, Redfern goes to the bakery. She says leg amputee Frederick Melville turned up at the morgue drowned shortly before the murder. No evidence of foul play, but Louis doesn't buy it. Smythe and Brandt had no criminal record, but Brandt was investigated by the RCMP for potential involuntary shock treatment on homosexual inmates 11 years prior. Louis lays it all out. Brant couldn't experiment on prisoners anymore, so now he does it on inebriated homeless men, shoving some in the river, but the one almost gets away, so they stab him and frame Vernick out of convenience. Redfern says she needs evidence to get a judge to listen. Louis insists they at least go to the Crown Attorney Spencer. She does, and gets told she is having natural second thoughts and shouldn't let her emotional state allow her to listen to crazy theories. She's afraid of losing her job, and Louis says he'll go it alone. Not quite alone, because he doesn't drive, so he enlists Marge for a stakeout. They follow Brant's car, and Louis sees Brant's men snatch an unconscious man off the street. Back at the Institute, Louis tells Marge to go call the cops while he sneaks into the Institute. Louis gets in, while Marge is turned away from one house and flees a dog at another. Louis tries to help the man escape, but he's still too drunk to walk. Brant and his men catch Louis. They suggest they will induce a heart attack, but the man on the table rolls a cart into Brant, and Louis makes a break for it. The cops arrive, and 6 of them tackle before Marge can say that it's him. He wakes in a hospital with Redfern waking him. She's got more than enough in Brant's detailed notes to put them all away. His editor calls him, expecting the story and taking him off suspension. Louis even gets Marge to let him go back to the house, just for a few days, and the episode ends on a kiss. What made him see it? This is a new category. If this was on American network television, I suspect the execs would have demanded an initial cause for Louis' vision up front in the series. Like the much later series Wonder Falls was required to have the wishing well scene added at the beginning of the pilot. I'm not sure if an origin story for the Visions is ever explored over the run of the series. Now, for example, the first courtroom Visions did not seem to feature a specific trigger, so I won't be talking about that kind of thing in this recurring segment. But if there's a discernible cause, I'll feature it here. So when Louis did the trust fall, seeing the character looming over him gave him a vision of the handling of the test subjects. My favorite line...
In my mind, I saw Aunt Millie and her rum cake. It's clear as day. It even had the little red and the green cherries right on top.
I got it. Aunt Millie killed the drunk with the rum cake.
Oh, come on, Marge, please, I'm serious here.
Who is? This time we're going with who is Louis Del Grande. I mentioned earlier the information being thin online about the show in general, and I'll have to say I'm not getting a whole lot more about Louis Del Grande either. Louis was born in Union City, New Jersey in 1943. He began acting in New York City and had a role at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. He was drawn to Canada in 1964 by the Stratford Festival, which is a Canadian Shakespeare and theatre festival I've covered quite a bit in the past on the Ghostlight podcast. I don't see any record of him performing at Stratford, though Stratford itself only appears to list past appearances as part of current cast bios. He found work in stand-up in Toronto, and then as a comedy writer, including, as mentioned earlier, The King of Kensington in 1975. He appeared in David Cronenberg's Scanners in 1981, then made his way to Hollywood and found the rat race of American pilot season was not to his liking. He moved back to Toronto, and then Seeing Things was born. Seeing Things ran through 1987. Since then, he's mostly appeared in Canadian or Canadian-filmed movies and television, including Due South, FX the Series, The Outer Limits revival, Goosebumps, as a teacher who loses his hair, Big Wolf on Campus, and Lex. Wikipedia lists him as a retired actor, and it looks as though his last IMDb credit is 2016's The Second Time Around, supporting Stuart Margolin, who I recently did a bio of on The Rockford Files. This last film also starred his real-life wife, Martha Gibson, who is seen here in Seeing Things as Louis' estranged wife, Marge. Totally 80s and or aged poorly. It's another regular segment that I do on these shows. This series began and concluded in the 80s, and if I see something that says 80s, it'll come up here. Also, if anything airs that might have played fine on TV at the time but has since turned cringe, I'll call it out as having aged poorly. This might technically be an artifactoid here, but I had to note it somewhere, since it sort of fits the 80s and is a bit cringe, so here it is. Louis uses a Chinatown phone booth with a pagoda-esque theming. I looked it up online and found a Toronto Star file photo of a booth like it, if not the same booth, on Dundas Street West at McCall. The photo is from 1971, and it looks to have been in better condition at that point. Canada is not the only place prone to questionable theming, of course. I found reference to the similar booth in New York City in 1962 as well. And we can't avoid as cringe the use of shock therapy treatment on homosexual prisoners that Brandt had done. At least he was censured for it. Artifactoids is the segment where if I spot something and do a deeper dive, I'll put it here. On other shows, it's been locations, cars, and in one case, a sucker on the counter in a convenience store. I believe the street depicted in the opening as Louis leaves the bakery is Dundas Street West in Toronto. Based on the phone number over the door and the fragment of signage visible, this is a location of Caldence Bakery that is at 1209 Dundas and retains the business name and phone number to this day. It is not necessarily canon that his parents own Caldence Bakery specifically, but I suppose it's possible. Louis' dad is Italian. His mom is not specified, but the dialogue indicates she is not Italian. The location is Little Italy, which in modern times has a large population of Latin Canadians and Portuguese Canadians. Caldence is known as a Portuguese bakery and has a number of locations, both franchised and original. Their website says they began business in 1968. I believe this location was the original one, according to what I'm seeing online. The family moved to a new location in Bradford in 2014, with this location remaining in operation. I'm not clear on whether the full operation is still owned by them, but it looks like there are corporate offices and a central production facility in York, Ontario. Clearly Canadian. Another recurring segment for Canadian shows. I don't know if this will come up in every episode, but it's a little like the Artifactoid, except in this case it's something that is specific to Canada. I used this category previously on the Men with Brooms series. It does not appear that the CBC is a stickler for product names, like its counterpart, the BBC across the pond. There are Kellogg's, Star Wars, and McDonald's references shown or referenced in this episode. Hopefully I can get at least some product references, if not cultural details. The only really obvious thing about this episode was the Canadian court dress, which is derived from British court dress. The judges wear robes, but also the barristers wear gowns in court. Unlike the British courts, wigs were done away with a long time ago in the 1800s for most provinces, including Ontario. So what worked? Louis is likable, but also clearly flawed. You can see some of the traits that have caused the marital separation in this episode. As I pointed out earlier, they give absolutely no indication of why Louis started having visions, and I like that. You can really see the potential of the series, both in terms of the main mystery and visions part, but also the character relationships. This was a very solid pilot, especially considering the sitcom roots of its creators. What didn't work? Well, as so often happens in an hour drama, the climax of the episode felt rushed, and the criminals were apprehended off-screen. Louis was in peril for maybe a minute or two of the episode before the cops came in. The result was a rather suspenseless conclusion. So next time is Seeing Things Season 1, Episode 2, Sight Unseen. Happy hunting! You've been listening to the One Idjit's Thoughts On podcast, produced by Paul Mackey in association with Nimlas Studios. Any short clips of audio from shows is included under fair use for commentary purposes, and copyright for that content remains with its original copyright holders. The theme song is Too Good by Jack Mangan and is used by his generous permission. One Idjit's Thoughts is produced under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License. You can find more episodes of this podcast and many other fine podcasts at nimlas.org. You can contact me by emailing idjitcastpodcast@gmail.com or commenting on episodes at nimlas.org. I just couldn't touch Marlon's zucchini going soft. Except apparently in the after music line, huh?